Well, good evening. Welcome back to the Country Preacher again. This is Preacher Ricky Hackett, and we are thankful to have the opportunity to join you once again wherever you're watching from, whether it be from your hospital bed or maybe your own living room or your bedroom. Wherever you might be watching this program from tonight, we thank you for watching. We talked to a gentleman yesterday, and he told us that he appreciated us having the online. Where he lived at was an area that didn't have many churches that had sound preaching, and he said, I really appreciate you having that program online for us to watch, and I'm thankful that he let us know that. It's always a blessing to hear from individuals. You'll see at the end of our program an address where that you can write us and let us know. I know that's a little bit different, but there's email addresses there also where that you can let us know that you're watching this program. We thank you for watching. We're going to go on into our message tonight. We're going to the book of Nehemiah. The book of Nehemiah, if you want to turn there with us right quickly. We always encourage those to read along with us and make sure we read it right. In the book of Nehemiah, the story is about a man who was of the children of Judah. He was in exile in Babylon, as it was called originally, but now he is in a place called Shushan, and he is the king's cupbearer. Apparently he had been the king's cupbearer for several years. He had been one that was familiar to the king at that time. And what it says, and we're going to start a reading lesson with verse 2. And what it says in verse 2, and it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that the wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, Why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very sore afraid. Now I'm going to stop for just a moment. We'll read on in a minute. In those days, when that a king, anyone was before the king, they were not allowed to be what you will say of a sad countenance. Now they understood if somebody was sick or something like that, but they were not allowed to be sad in the presence of their masters. And in this case, this was a very unusual thing for Nehemiah to be in this condition at this time. But he had heard from some family members about his homeland, Jerusalem, and how that the walls were knocked down and the gates were burned up, and this had made him very sad at that time. And he had fasted the night before, what the scripture said, and prayed all night about this matter. And I would imagine he was saying, Lord, if there could just be a way. Well, the Lord was making a way here before King Artaxerxes, and what it was, he allowed Artaxerxes to notice the sadness that was in Nehemiah's eyes. But I want you to listen just a little bit more. And he said unto the king, Let the king live forever. This is a proper greeting for a royal person. Why should not my countenance be sad, when the city, the place of my father's sepulchre, grave, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? Then the king said unto me, For what dost thou make request? So I prayed to God of heaven. So let's stop once again right quick. God opened a door. Yes, he opened a door for Nehemiah to speak his heart. And when he opened that door, Nehemiah talked about the way how Jerusalem was. And he could tell, the king that is, could tell Nehemiah wanted to do something about this, but he needed to hear it out of Nehemiah's mouth. And he says, What are you wanting to do then? And what happens then, and then and I said unto the king, If it would please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchre, that I may build it. And the king said unto me, the queen also sitting by him, For how long shall thy journey be? And when wilt thou return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Now that's reading the first 6 verses of the 2nd chapter of Nehemiah today for our reading lesson. I want you to notice God put some things in order. There had already been a group that had went back to Jerusalem to try to build the temple, rebuild it. But now Nehemiah was going to try to build the walls back up. And doing this, we find a man that was a cupbearer, a servant to the king, A man who really had no reason whatsoever to have really any favor in the king's eyes, to allow him to go back to Jerusalem just to build up the walls of the city, of the place where his father's sepulcher was. Now I want you to think about this. This is a servant of a king, and what he is doing is making a request after the king had said, "Why are you sad?" Now, in this we find two words that we're going to try to bring out in this message today. And Nehemiah said, "If I have found favor in thine eyes." I know that's more words, but the main two words are found favor. In this we find that Nehemiah, at this moment in time, I believe he had became a friend to the king and the queen. They trusted him. They understood him. I believe he understood the king and his queen very much so. I believe he had found favor in all of the people there that were of the Median Persian Empire. He was a servant, though. And because that he was that servant, he was expected to serve as a cupbearer for the king. He took the cup, he drank of it, made sure that it was well, it was both sweet and not poisonous for the king, and then he presented it, excuse me, unto the king. That was his job daily. His job was to make sure that that wine was perfect in every way for the king and his queen. And in doing that, he was a servant to that king. He was nothing more than a servant. He was nothing more than just a man that was in their presence. But he had found favor in their eyes. And truthfully, we see where the king had a compassionate heart for this man, Nehemiah. He said, "Why are you sad, seeing that you're not sick?" He understood the countenance of the man. He understood the idea of the man's sadness. And when Nehemiah spoke of these things, then what do you ask? Then he said unto him, Nehemiah speaking, that I might go back and that I might have the ability to build up the walls. And then later on, we didn't read it, but he said, that you might write letters to the men of the forest, that they might cut timber, and that they might prepare it for the building of the walls. Now you might say that this was God's providence, and it was. It was God's providence. But the part that we really want to bring out is about God's favor in this time. Now, when you see the word favor there, most of the time, in our language here, and I think I've brought it out on this program before, but most of the time that we bring out the word favor, it's like the word, will you do me a favor? Will you do something for me? In that circumstance, you might say that Nehemiah was asking a favor of the king. But he said, if I have found favor. This is the same word that when we use the word grace many times, it is the same word, favor, grace. In the Bible, we find that Noah found grace in the eyes of God. He found favor in the eyes of God. I'll give you another one out of the New Testament. It said about Mary when the angel came to her in the 30th verse of the first chapter of Luke. It said, the angel said unto her, Mary, you have found favor in the eyes of God. She had found grace in his eyes. She had found being one that pleased God in that time. Now we're talking about this favor, this grace that is coming before us today. Most of the time when we define the word grace, and it is true in many cases of the Bible, that grace is an unmerited favor of God, one of the things that he allows for us to do. But it is also being found in favor being one that is appreciated, one that is accepted of the king or of someone else. Now, we're going to give you a couple of natural circumstances first that we're going to show you what this favor is. In the 18th chapter of the book of Genesis, we're talking about Abraham. At this time, he had already been given the name of Abraham, and his wife had given the name of Sarah, and they had been given the promise of God that they would have a child. Now, they had not received this promise as fast as they thought they would, but the scripture tells us now in his 99th year, Abraham was old and stricken with age, as well as his wife, Sarah had, and they are sitting there at their place of camp in Mamre in this chapter. And what the scripture says, that Abraham lifted up his eyes and he sees three men coming toward his camp. Now, what the scripture tells us in this time, and just let us read verses 2 through 6 of this 18th chapter. And he lifted up his eyes, and he looked, and lo, three men stood by him. And when he saw them, he ran to them from the tent door, and bowed himself toward the ground, and said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant. Let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will fetch a morsel of bread, and comfort ye your hearts, after that ye shall pass on. For therefore are ye come to your servant. And they said, So do, and thou hast said. Now, this was a question that Abraham said to these three men. Now, at this point in time, I'm not sure if Abraham actually recognized who these gentlemen were. I'm going to say gentlemen in that way. But when he saw them, he said they were men that stood by his camp. Later on, we understand, and many people translate them as being angels of God. Many people will even say that one of them is Jesus himself, and that is what I would tend to say. And when these men have come to Abraham at this time, he says, if I found favor in your eyes, if it pleases you in this moment and in this time, that you would come into my camp. We'll wash your feet. You can rest in the shade of the tree. We'll get you some bread and a kid to eat. We'll give everything unto you at this time. Now, the Bible tells us that we should always be careful that we may entertain angels unaware. In this time, we find Abraham entertaining the Lord himself. This is the point in time that when the Lord speaks to him, and I believe Abraham recognizes him as the Lord at this time, and he said, the Lord said unto him, Where is Sarah thy wife? And he says, She's in the tent. And he starts to tell him, You're going to bear a son of her in this time. Being a 90-year-old or a 100-year-old. Now, Sarah laughed at this time. But I want you to see the idea of finding favor in the eyes of someone, especially of the Lord himself. Now, let me give you another one right quickly as an example of this favor. We're running out of time quickly. As what it says in the 33rd chapter of the book of Genesis. We're going to give you a couple of verses here. And this is the time that Jacob was coming back home to his brother Esau. He had done, basically, in Esau's mind, done him wrong. He had caused a deception to be made that Jacob received the blessing that he was going to receive. Now, in the 10th verse, it talks about that they are coming back together. Jacob had set his wives
in front of him. He had separated them part to the left and part to the right, and Jacob was coming up through the rear of this, and he had sent presents unto his brother, a herd of sheep and cattle before them. But in verse 10, Jacob said unto Esau, he says, Nay, I pray thee, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then receive my present at my hand. For therefore I had seen the face of God, and thou wast pleased what with me. He said in that moment in time, your face is like the face of God. You know why he said that? Because that his brother had power to kill Jacob at that time. He had power to take everything that Jacob had come in that place. But he said, if I have found grace, favor in your eyes at this time, he said, I want you to take my gift unto you. I want you to think about the moment and time that you were saved by the grace of God. I want you to think about the joy that he brought to you in that time. What had you done to deserve that salvation? What had you done that maybe he would find favor in you enough that you might be saved? The only thing I did was beg the Lord for mercy, is what I did. But I want you to understand something today, that God will not turn away a broken heart and a contrite spirit. That broken heart, being one that is broken and knowing the sinful condition that we are in, knowing that condition that we are in is so broken that we cannot save ourselves. Jacob knew at that moment and at that time he had no power at that time. He had no defense. He had done the very exact thing that Esau thought he had done. He had deceived his father. He had caused him to give him the blessing that his father thought Esau deserved. And because of that, there was a deception. There was a lie. And he was deserving of any punishment that Esau wanted to give him. Now, in that moment in time in which that I myself was in trouble with God, I deserved the punishment of God. The punishment of God for our sin is death, is what the scripture says. The penalty of sin is death, according to Romans and the 8th chapter. I believe that's right. But because that there was one that I found favor with, who was the Son of God himself, and what he did was that he himself sought to give me mercy and grace. And that grace at that time was the unmerited favor that he did for me. The unmerited favor that he did for me was that even though I didn't deserve it, he gave his life that I might be saved. He gave his life on the cross of Calvary, paying the penalty of my sin. You see, when Jacob was before Esau, he sent the presents on in front of him, the herd of sheep and cattle before him. But when Esau came to his brother, he didn't know what the sheep was for. You'll find that in a few verses after that. And he said, when he saw his brother coming to him, it says that weeping, he fell on Jacob's neck. You know, we find in the scripture, Jesus told the parable of the prodigal son, that when he had returned from his sinful ways and he came to his father, that his father saw him coming yet a far ways off. And when he came to him, his father ran to him. And then his son, after he had been embraced by his father, he said, Father, I'm no more worthy to be called thy son. Just let me be as one of thy hired servants. When Jacob came to Esau, he knew he deserved anything that his brother wanted to put out. But his brother fell on his neck, and he wept with his brother. And he looked around, and he said, what be these in thy company? He says, this is the graciousness of God. This is the favor of God that he has given unto me. These women, this wives, and this children, and they have these cattle. All of these things are showing the favor of God upon me. And he said, what was the hurts before him? And he said, these are the presents that I give unto you. Well, I want you to understand, I had nothing to offer God in the day that I was saved. All I had was a broken heart and a contrite spirit, being crushed in the fact that I could do nothing for myself. All I wanted was to be found in the favor of my God. Like Nehemiah, not deserving to even speak to the king in that moment, not deserving even to put out a request at that time. But my God and my King, he said, what will you have me do unto you? And my request, my prayer was, Lord, please save my soul. My friends, today, that is the favor of God and how that it works for us. The natural aspects is that we receive favor, in other words, that people might have grace toward us and favor toward us. But in the ways of God, that he might have favor enough upon us that he would save our soul. We thank you for watching the Country Preacher tonight. Until next time, good night.